Video games aren't usually made by a single director. There's a whole team of coders, designers, testers, and of course, artists. Whether it's the storyboarders, the animators, or the illustrators, a lot of the ones that came out during the 80s and 90s weren't necessarily inspired by video games when they were still young and developing their initial talent. That includes those I've spoken of previously. Much of it had to do with the medium's incredibly limited graphic capabilities in its early years. I don't think a lot of artists can get any real inspiration from the likes of Pong. Maybe Malevich. Further speaking on that, a lot of these people who end up as prominent figures of the industry didn't aspire to become video game developers. Many of them were interested in a different creative medium, such as film or general programming. It used to be said that video games were for people who couldn't make it in Hollywood. These creators who have seen video games as a second choice came into the industry at a great time because the tools were finally there to better bridge the gap between concepts and graphics. The 16-bit consoles that dominated the 90s allowed for your average depiction of spaceships to go from this to this. With the burden of visualization no longer thrust upon the audience and massive exposure to video games in the form of local arcades and home consoles during this generation, our little story about a Jersey-born game artist can finally begin.
Oh, the dive bomb correctly blocked by Decay.
And Decay loading up. I think we're past Clash territory.
Oh! This does it?
Decay says, what are you doing? You do not know who I am. Decay being very patient, and he goes in with the overhead hook charge. Oh, the double jump, not gonna bite. He ain't biting. Look at Decay smiling.
Trying to keep himself safe from...
And Decay with a miraculous headshot.
Oh my God, 26% back to back. Decay still has 1 meter.
Oh no!
And he uses
Can he
it
use
with the
it?
toss.
Oh, what a comeback.
What an incredible set. Decay so hype right now. He was on the verge of defeat.
My name is Eric Tiberius Tron, also known as Decay in the fighting game community. I've worked on Mortal Kombat and Injustice 2 with NetherRealm Studios and currently with Tripwire Interactive.
Eric Tran grew up in North Jersey with his parents. His father, Dong Tran, immigrated from Saigon, Vietnam. Dong was an artist who, from a young age, was bored by the unengaging curriculum that made up Saigon's art classes.
He was basically self-taught in Saigon. Over there, that he said that the art program is so shitty that the teacher would put down like a statue or something on his desk and be like, okay, now draw this, and then like just read the newspaper for the entirety of the class, and they just had to figure out how to draw. So he was inspired by French artists since they're like French occupied, and they read all the French comics, the novels, Mobius, and he loved like Valerian, like way back when. So he like was inspired by that style, and he adapted his style to like kind of match that kind of thing. When he went to college in America, like as part of a government thing that they took like good students from Vietnam and gave them a college education close to New York, and immediately got a job with DC Comics when DC was in New York.
Once arriving in America, his father managed to land a job with DC Comics and was tasked to work on smaller projects such as animated commercials, but most of what he worked on never really got past the cutting board.
We'll put you on like pencil work for this thing that we're doing with Atari. And that never like came into fruition. Like they pulled their money out last minute, and yeah, he was doing like a bunch of random animations and whatnot, but it's pretty impressive for like a Vietnamese immigrant to just like, you know, nail a job at DC.
Before Eric was even born, he had to leave the industry in order to support his growing family with a more steady and stable job. Considering how underpaid some of the biggest creators in the industry were, it isn't hard to imagine why he felt this was the best decision to make. Of course, that didn't stop Eric from reaching a pencil and paper.
What made me get started and got me interested in what I'm doing currently is the overall passion for video games as a young child growing up. And I also had like a Sega Genesis at a super young age. It sort of like all came together where I always drew things that inspired me, and I always played games that inspired me, and then I would draw things from the games. But it wasn't until like later on in life that I realized that there's a career path for that. But I've always been doing it as like a child growing up into like my teens. I just didn't know at the time, like, hey, you know, you can make money creating characters, drawing things from games, creatures, whatever.
He's been drawing for as long as he can remember, motivated by his skilled father while also inspired by some of the biggest dark fantasies of the early 90s. This was naturally accompanied by his mother's disapproval.
My parents just seeing all the nasty stuff I was drawing, and my mom was like, why don't you draw like cute flowers and angels and stuff like that? I'm like, no, I want to draw demons, you know, I've been playing this game called Doom, it's really cool. Mortal Kombat, you know, you're ripping people's heads off and...
Sub-Zero wins fatality.
Like many kids during this time, Eric played video games extensively and was particularly a fan of a very gruesome fighter for its time. While many arcade goers in the early 90s were familiar with Street Fighter II, which was making serious waves, Midway Games burst onto the scene.
Mortal Kombat changed the world of video gaming forever. The use of digitized actors, compelling characters, and gruesome graphic effects all helped to create a phenomena that took arcades by storm.
As one might expect, drawing with this kind of motivation eventually got Eric in a little trouble with the school he was attending. The crime? Expressing his creativity.
There was an animation I did based on Resident Evil. In middle school, there was like this super basic animation program. You draw with your mouse and then you drag it along. I forgot what it was called. It was like super basic on the computer in the back of like homeroom. And every single day I would be like, you know, animating this little story based on Resident Evil like 2. But it was like these kids in high school, and there's like a zombie outbreak. They're thinking it's like a joke because there's like a big zombie movie that just came out, and they're like, oh, these guys got like great costumes on, and then like they start getting bitten. And I was like working on this thing like the entire year. And then as I was working on it, it got like longer and longer. More and more of my classmates are coming, like dragging their seats to like watch me work on it. And it was like super in depth. So my teachers like freaked out about it.
This occurred shortly after the Columbine incident, which shook the foundation of public schools. So, needless to say, tensions were high and school boards wouldn't allow something like this to just slip through the cracks. And his parents' reaction?
They had like the principal talk to me, and then they had my parents come in to like watch it. And like my dad being an artist and an animator himself, he was like watching it, and then by the end of it, he's just like, "Oh man, I'm kind of disappointed. You didn't make the legs look a little better when they're walking." And the teacher's like, "You have anything to say, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Tron?" And like, "No, I mean, we're just gonna go get some ice cream now." Like, it was such a waste of time, but I was just like so pissed, and then they deleted it, and I never got to like finish it, and that was unfortunate because that was such a fun, like, you know, little experiment, and I just loved doing little animations like that.
It's good to know they weren't easily swayed by typical news reports about how violent video games are harming the young minds witnessing them.
These are not harmless toys, that they can indeed cause great emotional and other damage to a child.
Despite the concerns from the Board of Education, Eric was content throughout his school days while continuing to work on his artistic skills, all the way up to college where he majored in illustration. However, the old alma mater didn't turn out to be the rip-roaring good time he expected it to be.
I went to Rowan University, but at the time that I started, I literally like had no clue what I wanted to do with my future. I've always been drawing like creatures and just characters from games or for games. I didn't know that that was a career, so I didn't think that they could help me in school to do anything like that. So I pretty much was like a problem child in college. I didn't want to go to classes, just wanted to skateboard all day. I didn't like the curriculums for art because, you know, a lot of them are like, oh, you know, this is illustration class, now you have to draw like a sun in like a cool way, like to illustrate this image. And I'm just like, man, this sucks, you know, like I don't like this. I'm not having fun. I already know how to draw this stuff. And so, you know, I was like doing pretty poorly at first.
Just like his father, he found the professor's methods of teaching illustration to be dry and uninteresting. He was losing motivation throughout his college years. But who better to remind Eric the beauty of art?
It wasn't until my father actually gave me a copy of the Spectrum magazine, which is an annual publication that they have like all the best like digital artists and illustrators, and then they give them like awards based on their illustrations. And I was looking at the book, I'm like, man, this stuff is awesome. I want to do stuff like this. A lot of them, it said digital artwork, and at the time, like I didn't know how to do any digital work. I didn't have like a tablet. I was like just so impressed that digital artwork could look like traditional. I told my parents, like, you know, I want to get into digital artwork. I want to do this. Like, this is the stuff I've always wanted to do. There's just no specific classes for that. I got my tablet, talked to my teachers, like, hey, if you're not able to help me achieve this goal, can we at least do like independent studies and get as close to, you know, this goal as possible? And yeah, they were super cool with it. They were just happy that I found something that I would be interested in.
With that, Eric essentially made class assignments for himself to continue honing his craft and taking his skills in the direction he wanted. It shouldn't be a surprise considering how he was essentially self-taught from the beginning.
I would say I'm like 90% self-taught for the stuff that I do personally. The fundamental stuff that's like super important that, you know, I always respect my teachers for giving me like a foundation to work on.
However, it was near the end of his college career in 2009 that reality began setting in for him.
Okay, so when I graduated, I pretty much was like freaking out, you know, panicking, had no idea what to do. Like, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do concept art. I wanted to work in the game industry.
It's worth noting that there's no direct pipeline when it comes to working with prominent game companies, dissimilar to CalArts and the animation industry. Eric was able to work a menial job to make ends meet, but he knew from the very beginning that he couldn't let himself settle. His heart was calling out for so much more.
Knowing that I lived in New Jersey and knowing how difficult it is to get into the game industry, I was like, well, you know, I pretty much have to get a job to start paying off my student loan debt and everything. So I ended up just taking a retail job at an art store for a few years. But the thing is, like, I never really gave up the idea of like, I want to get out of here. I want to do games. I want to do this and that. I thought that if I took a job where I felt comfortable with the money I was making, I might just kind of like sit back and relax and never like chase my dream. So I kind of liked the idea of like struggling and hating my job every single day to like force me to work harder on my artwork and get better and like reach out to more studios. At that time, I had no idea what I was gonna do. I just kept working and trying to pursue whatever I could. I was applying to hundreds of studios, but a lot of them are like, you know, you need experience on AAA titles. Like, how the hell are you supposed to get this entry-level job if you've never even like done anything in the game industry before? It's really messed up.
Even so, this was a stagnant period in his life where he wasn't really able to find a means to get into the industry. Speaking of, let's talk about Mortal Kombat for a little bit, as well as its development team within Midway Games. The series was in deep trouble during this time. It suffered a period of irrelevance like most fighting games during the mid to late 2000s. It didn't help that these titles greatly varied in quality. Midway Games wasn't doing too great, hence their file for bankruptcy and dissolution around 2009. However, the developers of the most gruesome fighting games weren't going to take that sitting down. Rising from the ashes, they would come back as NetherRealm Studios. Their first big project to take the world by storm was Mortal Kombat 9 in 2011. This was NetherRealm bringing the whole formula back to the basics, back to the franchise's glory days, and back to what Eric loved about these games to begin with. It was the most earnest and purest fan service the franchise could muster, from all the classic fighters coming back to the combat being more brutal than ever, and the fighting mechanics scaling back to be more like the classic titles. Eric was happy to see this old series regain its glory, as it brought him to play the game online extensively during its high time. Come 2013, NetherRealm would bring another big fighting game known as Injustice: Gods Among Us. This one pitted many of DC's biggest heroes and villains to battle one-on-one. The gory nature of Mortal Kombat was replaced with dynamic, over-the-top brawling that these muscle-bound superheroes were more known for. Eric consistently did well during online play and was invited by tournament goers to compete alongside them. Getting into the fighting game community started giving him a social presence, typically going by the name Decay.
Decay not punishing those rockets, but getting under that chandelier somehow.
So Decay got him off of his clash. He just needs one big combo and he could close it out. And
just like
Decay just comes right back.
Do a good amount of chip.
Oh!
Shotgun to the chest.
That ain't fair. Batman can't use guns.
While making waves in the competitive scenes throughout the East Coast, he began sharing more of his art and drawing skills on social media platforms, including Instagram. He continued to play in the competitive scene throughout the lifespan of Injustice as well as Mortal Kombat X, the sequel to the 2011 game, and continued to gain notoriety. This is how Eric would get his first big break. As Eric continued to make ends meet with his retail job and competing in tournaments for the NetherRealm games, he was still working on his art and showing the world what he was capable of, while also trying to get attention from some of his favorite artists on the platform. Enter Marco Neller, a video game and movie concept artist. His portfolio includes artwork for Magic the Gathering, character concepts for Black Panther, HBO's Watchmen, and most relevantly, Mortal Kombat X.
Just through my hard work and artwork that I was like posting online on Instagram and reaching out to other artists in the industry, I got noticed by an artist, Marco Neller, at NetherRealm. He sort of like took me under his wing and we just like instantly connected as like friends. You know, I've been following Marco. He has like 1 million followers and shit on Instagram. He's super talented. And I was like looking at his work. I'm like, man, this guy's great. You know, like he works in NetherRealm. I'm already a competitor and I love the games. I've been a fan since I was a kid. Like let me follow this dude and see what he's doing. And then I remember I posted like anatomy studies or something like that, and I had tagged like a bunch of my favorite artists, like, dude, I want to get on their level, you know, I want to do what they're doing. And out of like the 3 or 4 artists that I tagged, Marco was the only person who like commented on it, and he was like, dude, this is sick. Like he's like, I need to start doing stuff like this. Yeah, he followed me back. We just became like instant friends online. Like we had like a lot of similar interests, like bodybuilding, fashion, and obviously games and art.
And what was the best way for these online friends to meet and get to know each other even better?
He was going to EVO like with a bunch of NetherRealm people, and he asked me if I was going too. And at the time I wasn't planning on it, but he was like, yo, if you go to EVO, we got an Airbnb and you could get a room if you want with us and just like meet people in the industry. I was like, dude, this is, I can't let this opportunity go, because there's like literally nothing, like this is the best opportunity I've ever had living in New Jersey. People don't get opportunities like that every day, and I felt like I worked hard enough to you know, achieve it. So I booked my flight, went to EVO. I like chilled with all these guys in a house. We just became instant friends, and they were all like, Eric, dude, we had so much fun, like you're super talented, like why don't you get in the game, you need to be in the game industry. And I told them the whole thing, like, you know, I live in New Jersey, in Bloomfield, like there's nothing, like not even New York has anything really, especially for someone just trying to get in the industry. Like there's Rockstar, but it's Rockstar, right? So not too many weeks after that, Marco reached out again and was like, you know, if there's an opening in QA here, would you take it? Like I would suggest that you do, but would you move to Chicago for it? And I was like, you know, like I got nothing to lose. Like, I kind of got to like break out of my comfort zone as it is. So if you could like put my resume in front of the right people and I'm guaranteed a job, then I'll move out there and live with you as your roommate and all that. So
Marco was able to give Eric the right kind of exposure that would land him a phone interview with NetherRealm Studios. The hardest part was behind him. Or so he thought.
I actually remember that interview too, because it was super stressful. They were planning on calling me at like 5 p.m. I was at the Metropolitan Museum like studying some sculptures, and I was like, you know, like worst comes to worst, I'll just like go into a quiet room in the museum and take this call. But like I didn't realize that they closed early on Sundays, so they were like kicking me out at 4, and it was like blistering cold outside. And I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do for an hour like outside waiting for this like interview, and then I had to like catch the bus to like get back to the train station. They called me like on the back of the little bus, and I interviewed like while people were like yelling and fighting each other on the bus, and I was just like, this is so embarrassing. I'm definitely not gonna get this job. Like if they hear any of this. And I couldn't hear them either, so I'm like, excuse me, like what'd you say? I'm sorry. Like
thankfully the people conducting the interview paid no mind. Eric landed the job and was on his way to Chicago.
I'm in a hotel. I'm moving. I'm in the process of moving. I'm going to Chicago to work with NetherRealm Studios.
A dream come true, he was ready to work with the creators behind some of his biggest childhood memories.
So I started, like when I first got into NetherRealm, it was like the very end of Mortal Kombat XL. and it was pretty much done at that point. Like the characters were just coming out. It was actually a great time to get started because then I got to see Injustice 2 from like the very, very beginning stages to the release of it. So I was there in like 2016 to winter 2018. So I got to see the entire process of Injustice 2 being made.
Landing a QA position with NetherRealm was pretty great for Eric, but he wasn't done flexing just yet. He wanted to get noticed by the big leagues, namely Ed Boon, the co-creator of the Mortal Kombat series and founder of this new company. From the surface, it sounds like a pretty tall order, because it was.
So as a QA person, basically, you know, there's tons of QA people who get in an industry who want to like show what their talents are. I guess they're afraid or they don't market themselves correctly. I don't know, but a lot of people just don't do enough in QA to show like what they're good at. And Marco had explained to me, he's like, your first day, you need to like impress as many people as you can. Any opportunity that like pops up for artwork, you should be like the first one on it. I had already had like my first MK drawing I ever did. I had it framed. I guess I was like in 5th grade or something like that. It was like Scorpion punching Reptile in the dick. It's super cool. Like when you look at it, like this little kid drew this thing, you know? The first day of work, I walked into Ed Boon's office. Like no one does that, you know, like especially like a newbie. But everyone, like a lot of people are afraid of him, like to talk to him, and he's like the nicest guy. I go into his office, introduce myself, and I'm like, hey, you know, like this is how long I've been inspired by your games. This is how long I've been drawing your characters. I showed him some of my current work too, but I was like, you know, I want you to have this, like my first MK drawing ever, and he was like super appreciative of it.
It's just enough to make you cry, isn't it? Eric took the opportunity to show the creator of this legendary game series how much it means to him in the most earnest and heartfelt way one could imagine, with a kid drawing display of cockpunchery. This was a perfect icebreaker, as Ed Boon got to learn more about Eric and his artistic sense. Once it came to getting concept work done for Injustice 2, he was invited to join the other artists to come up with ideas for the planned roster.
I guess ever since that moment that he like knew who I was, whenever there was an opportunity to do like a storyboard or create something for like a super move or an intro, he sort of would like reach out to me and be like, hey, you know, like we need ideas for Green Lantern's super move. You know, I saw the work that you're capable of. Like, would you want to like be in a conference meeting and talk about this stuff? So I was like instantly cool with Ed.
While we're on the subject of art, it's important to know that everyone has their own process. Even when they're working on the same product, the way they achieve their final step is radically different.
One of the first things that Marco commented on when we were like drawing together in Chicago, he's like, man, I don't know how you just like start scribbling in pen and ink. Like I just don't know how you do that. So I think we have a very different approach. Like he likes to plan things out well in advance, you know, use a lot of references and stuff like that, which is awesome, you know, because then you get like more realistic looking stuff. Maybe just because how my brain works, or like my personal style, or maybe I'm just like lazy. I don't want to be looking at references for anything, but I just like to like throw scribbles. Like my sketches are so freaking like ugly at first because I'm like just trying to find shapes and turn them into things. I think it's like when like left brain, right brain kind of stuff. I don't know if that's even a thing, but it's sort of like my father's very right-handed, left brain kind of approach, like sort of like Marco, where it has to plan everything out to a T. And me, it's like I'm a lefty, and I want to think that I'm very right brain oriented, where I just want to like throw down as many like shapes and colors and stuff as I possibly can, and I don't want to use a ruler. I don't want to use grids. Like I don't want to use reference. Like I will if I have to, but that's the last thing I want to do. I just want to like make a cool looking creature. Like I don't really care if it's 100% in perspective. Like I'll figure that out later. I think that's like one of the main differences that I noticed when we were working together. But obviously like he's had a lot more experience in the field than I have. So there's a lot of like great things that I picked up from him as an artist that, you know, I incorporate into my work every day, and in my like Photoshop painting, like all the like little tips and tricks that I just sort of stole.
For someone who claims they don't plan or think too hard on what they're going to draw, he came out with something more meticulous and detailed than you would believe when he started coming up with super moves for characters, such as Swamp Thing. So much to the point that Ed Boon told him,
"Dude, this is sick." He's like, "But we normally don't do storyboards like this intricately painted and detailed because we kind of want some wiggle room when we go to mocap. We don't want it to be like so outlined this way specifically. We want some wiggle room." So he's like, "If you could like do another super move but like a little bit more sketchy, that would be great, but we already have Swamp Thing, so don't worry about it." So I basically had the Swamp Thing super move storyboard to show what I was capable of, but him saying like, "Oh, you know, like make it sketchier," that kind of made it like way easier for me to just like pump out ideas. So I think the first one that stuck was Bane. So I worked on Bane's on my own, and I came up with some ideas, and I pitched it to Ed, and he's like, "Dude, I really like this." He's like, let's make it more dynamic. Like let's make him like do some moves in the air and all that stuff. So I like changed it up a little bit. It was like exactly what he wanted. And he's like, "All right, yeah, we're gonna mocap this now." I was like, "Yo, that's awesome." I'm gonna see something that I came up with and drew mocaps for a game that I was like just such a huge fan of, like the first one. And ever since that first storyboard that made it into Mocap Studio, they stopped sending the emails out for the whole studio to like contribute ideas, and they were like just coming straight to me at that point. So it was like me and designers of the characters would like email back and forth like, "All right, we need Cyborg, we need Darkseid, we don't know what Darkseid does." I remember one of the first ones that I was like super proud of that I created was Captain Cold's, because, you know, like being creators of Mortal Kombat, they already had like all these extravagant super moves and fatalities involving ice. And all the ideas that they had were just like, "Oh, you know, like this, he makes like ice spikes and I don't know, like a big block." But they're all things that they've done a million times. So I had to like really sit down and think about like, what is a dynamic motion that I could create that hasn't been done yet in the game and true to the character. So I was thinking about Snow Globe. I wanted this idea of a snow globe. I wanted to do like a spiral in super move. I love Cyborg, so I wanted to work on his. I remember Derek Kurtz is saying like, "Well, we want to incorporate the boom tubes." If you remember in Injustice 1, like he had such a basic super move where he just like shot a giant cannon. It's like, well, he could do so much more. He could do he could like do everything, you know? Brainstorming a bunch of ideas, pitching them, either coming up with a ton on my own or like working with other designers. I actually came up with Darkseid's super move at my buddy John Martinez's house. He's got to have a 6 super. Like this is a pre-order bonus, and like he's got to have like the best super move in the game. So we were just like pitching ideas, looking up like everything that Darkseid's capable of. Yeah, I remember like I went to a meeting, like a super move meeting, and Darkseid wasn't even on it for the list of characters that they were gonna go over, and I had already done the drawings for it. I was like, "Oh, you know, I also have an idea for Darkseid super," and I just like I showed them the drawings, and they were like, "They're like, let's do that as soon as we can." And I did a bunch of concept art for like Cyborg's gear, like Deadshot's gear. I did concept art for Green Lantern's mech and his super move, which the super move itself I also worked on.
Throughout the launch of Injustice 2, it received critical acclaim for its presentation, story, and hard-hitting action that felt more grounded and realistic than the previous game. This direction also led to criticism from fans that weren't as enthusiastic when it came to the final product. After all, many of their design choices felt like they wanted the game to be more comparable to the recent films rather than the comics, what with them trying to go for more realistic presentation, as silly as that may seem. How would a previous competitor and someone who worked on the game feel about these changes with a character like Bane?
I don't know exactly what the intention was. I guess more to be more like based in realism. There's like a little bit more of like a realistic tone to it, and like a giant wrestler, you know, like doesn't really match that. And I guess they were like drawing inspiration more from like the Dark Knight Rises, where he's got like more military gear. He's more like a tactician. He's less like of a hulking beast. There aren't really too many like giant characters in 2. When in 1 there was like Grundy, Bane was humongous, you know, Doomsday. So I guess they like sort of normalized the characters to be more realistic proportions. I still stand by it that I think Injustice 1 was one of the most fun games from NetherRealm that I played. And I think because it's a little bit more cartoony, they took more liberties on a lot of their moves. They were like goofier, everything was a little bit more like comic booky, and I think that they lost some of that in Injustice 2, like chasing realism. And Injustice 2 is super dark. That was sort of an issue when you would be watching a stream or like looking at a projector and you could like barely see anything happening. Even like going back to the Bane question, like the fact that he's so militant, like it would be cool to make him like a giant beefcake again, like huge, like comic book Bane. And then another major thing is like focus on making songs per level that like resonate with the player for like a long time. They got the graphics, they got the face animation, everything's gorgeous and like memorable. But then when it comes down to the music, like I can't even remember any song and any, I mean, MKX, Injustice 1, Injustice 2, and I played these games for hours. Parts of my life are gone to these games and I can't even remember a single song. But like, I've never played Killer Instinct. I've watched it a few times on stream, but like the soundtrack from Mick Gordon is just so godlike. It's like that itself would sell me on that game if I had an Xbox or whatever. If NetherRealm ever got to that point where they take the soundtrack like that seriously, have like maybe like character themes per level, as long as the gameplay is there and the graphics are as good as they are, if the music is on point like that, then it's like the ultimate experience for a NetherRealm game.
Still, Eric will always be extremely grateful that he was able to contribute to this game. He loved working on it as much as he loved playing it, and while the workload was taxing, it's a time he'll never forget. This was one hell of a way to start your career in the game industry. Throughout Injustice 2's period of development, he also had his ear to the communities he was a part of as a competitive player, and he was amused by the predictions and supposed leaks that would spread like wildfire on the internet.
Especially with like DLC characters, guest characters, I think most people were wrong about like who DLC was gonna be. There was one random YouTuber, I remember that like we were sending the YouTube video around. This person just guessed like the Ninja Turtles. Like he's 100% confident like Ninja Turtles are gonna be in this game. In the comments, people were like, "Yeah, fuck you! Like no way! Like they'll never do it." And we were in the studio like shit and like, what if this video gets traction? Like it's ruined, you know? But it was like no one was like, shut the hell up, dude. Ninja Turtles are not in this game. And then when they did come out, everyone was like, oh my god, the Ninja Turtles are in the game. Like holy shit. But I'd say the majority of characters, like not too many people guessed the Hellboy was coming to the game. Like a lot of people were like mad that he was in the game. Like, oh, who cares about Hellboy? I'm like, dude, Hellboy's pretty sweet.
Eric also maintained a close relationship with the fighting game community during his time working with NetherRealm. He even drew this gorgeous piece for Sonic Fox, one of the top tournament players for nearly all of their games. Unfortunately, as Injustice 2's post-launch development period was coming to an end, so was Eric's contract with the company. There was no permanent position available for him, which meant he would be leaving just as their next game, Mortal Kombat 11, was beginning production. This left a certain CEO completely surprised.
At the end of my contract, after I had done a bunch of artwork with the team and like coming up with all this cool stuff, he just assumed I was an artist. Like he didn't know, you know, because he just like, hey, this guy's good. He's in all these meetings with us. When my first contract ended, it was like a 9-month contract. You know, I went to him to tell him like I'm leaving for a little bit. I'll be back next contract. He's like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're leaving? I was like, yeah, my contract is up. You know, like my QA contract. And he was like, he's like, QA? You're not a full-time artist? I was like, no, but I mean, I'll take that as a compliment, thinking that, you know, like you would think that I was at that level, you know, of importance. So yeah, I guess like my willingness to use my talents and help them out, even though it's not part of my job duties, they would come like looking for me, like asking my supervisor, hey, is it cool if Eric like works on this super move storyboard or like concept art piece, or I just do it at home, you know, on my own time, just because I was such a big fan and wanted to help out as much as I could.
His work was so convincing that it made the owner of the company think he was a permanent member of the art team. I've heard of fake it till you make it, but this is ridiculous. He wouldn't move on from NetherRealm without leaving a parting gift.
MK11 started, I was just about leaving, so I didn't get too much time to work on it. But I was in a few meetings for intros, and I guess like early on they were mostly concerned about intros and outros before like the fatalities and everything. So there's just like a few things that I contributed. One thing that I am glad that I got to suggest before I left is I was like pitching the idea like, you know, Kano should just be taking a piss and the camera's like on his back and he's just like, you know, he shakes it off. Like that's totally like, you know, in Kano's personality. And it's just like one of those simple ideas that people love now that's in the game. Like now that I see it, it's like people just love that he's taking a leak all over the stage. And yeah, that's like one of the few things that I was able to contribute before I left.
So what was the next possible path for Eric to go down? After the contract between Eric and NetherRealm ended, he did not stick in Chicago for very long.
The downtime sort of gave me a lot of opportunities to kind of like try different styles, play around with like JoJo's style and like anime styles, and just sort of like learn a little bit about myself before I jumped back into working in the studios again. So I originally moved to Georgia with my girlfriend at the time, who had got hired full-time as a QA for Hi-Rez.
Hi-Rez Studios is notable for publishing games such as Smite and Paladins.
And so they were already offering her to relocate from Chicago to Georgia, and we're like, you know, we should make this move. Like, I don't know if NetherRealm's the right choice to stay, like, you know, if it's just going to be contract over and over again. So then I had applied to Hi-Rez also for a concept art position. And they got back to me like, hey, would you like to start interviewing? I'm like, oh, this is like perfect opportunity, you know? So I started doing the interviews with them. Then they gave me an art test that took a week. I did the art test, I blew it away. The art director on the project gave me feedback and it was like, hey, can you fix this a little bit? And I fixed it and they're like, all right, let's schedule you a flight to come meet us and do an in-person interview. This is like 2 days before I was already gonna move. So I was like, yeah, you know, you could just wait 2 days and I'll be in the area. And they're like, no, we'll fly you out. So they flew me out. I had this like super long interview process at Hi-Rez for like 7 hours. It was like the entire day. They seemed like interested, obviously. It was like between me and like this one other guy. So I'm like, you know, like if I get this is gonna be like perfect, you know, just like the universe is looking out for me, you know?
While Eric considered the job all but in the bag, things didn't turn out exactly how he pictured.
It turns out like the other dude got the job. I didn't get told that I didn't get the job until like a month from when I moved. So I was like bummed out about it. It was this guy who's like been working on Destiny and like other games for like 10 years. And I was just like, why is this guy not like a senior? Like, why is he looking for the job I want? So I was like super bitter about it, just like sad.
The reality is, despite his talents, Eric wasn't able to stand against an artist heavily seasoned in the industry who happened to work on literally one of the top 10 most expensive games ever made. This left Eric on his own for a little bit until finding another opportunity that would prove to be much more fruitful.
And then I was like unemployed for a little bit in Georgia, and I saw Tripwire was hiring.
While the company is most well known for the Killing Floor series, they're also behind Red Orchestra, Rising Storm, and are currently finishing up Maneater, an action RPG where you play as a shark, terrorizing unsuspecting prey both on land and underwater. Well, the gory aspect is pretty status quo from this team.
But I wasn't like totally familiar with all their work. Like I obviously know like Killing Floor. So I was like, you know, let me put an application and my resume and see what happens.
He joined Tripwire through a contract in March of 2019 and gained a permanent position only 6 months later.
It worked out where they were close enough. I liked the studio being a little bit smaller. When I interviewed, it was like 80 people. Now there's like 88 or so. Like we are slowly expanding. But it was like a tighter knit family. It felt like a startup, but a startup that is on a solid foundation that's been around for 10 years now. It just sort of like fell in my lap that they're there, and that they offered me the job pretty quickly. Like they were like on top of it like 2 days after the interview, like, yeah, you got it, you know, like it just like felt so much like smoother and better ran. And like working there has just been an absolute pleasure. Like everyone is amazing. The heads of the company are great. Everyone's cool. Like they have like fighting game nights every now and then. Like, you know, I'm just like destroying everybody. Currently working on Maneater. So yeah, I'm just excited for the future of Tripwire. I feel like I got in at the right time, like right when they're starting to expand. I feel like the studio is going to do the best it's ever done in 2020. And I like got in just at the right time, like as a staple. I've already been super active and making a lot of cool friends in the studio, so I'm glad to be there.
Eric joined Tripwire in order to put his efforts into their future projects, now in a full-time position. He is in very high spirits and hopes to one day live out more of his dreams.
So a dream project of mine would be, and I've talked about it with a few friends who are like developers and stuff, that I would love to create. There's certain things like I've talked about, like the Lovecraftian elements and stuff that like stuff that inspires me. Like I would like to somehow make a game based on that. You know, that would be a goal of mine. There's also like certain games that I grew up with, like I said, growing up with Doom and Quake. If I had the opportunity to work for them and like create like demons, like that would be a dream come true. Those are the things that made my art the way that they are now. I just want to draw the stuff I want to draw. Like like that's every artist's dream, is to be yourself, draw like how and what you want to draw, and be able to make money from it. That's the dream of every artist, and not be, you know, not have to draw anything you don't want to. And like obviously you have to pay the bills, but when you get known enough, you get big enough, people will tend to search for you and your style. And yeah, I just want to get to a point where I could be doing that all day and not have to worry about paying bills or anything like that.
Hey, he's got one dream down. What's a few more down the line? Eric's story is certainly no fluke. It's the result of ambitiously grasping for your dream. While his career is far from over, he leaves us for now with these words for the next generation of artists.
Since it's hard to get in the industry, I guess you have to like break out of your comfort zone and take a big risk. If you've never done it before and you get the opportunity to even like get your foot in the door, I highly recommend it and go for it. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't work out for you. I mean, there's people who've been in the industry for 20 years and they're like, you know, it's not for me and I'm gonna leave. But at least you could say that you tried, and if you do like it, like, you're going to prosper because you'll have the passion to really like make something out of it. If you have the drive and you really want to get in the industry, don't feel like you're too good for any position. You need those years of experience, and there's only a few ways to get that, you know, with internships or with like getting QA or any position in the studio. So once you have that experience, it's much easier to get into like any studio you want. So I would highly recommend taking any chances, figuring out a way to make it work, no matter where it is. Be open to putting yourself out there. You know, like if you do get the opportunity to get in, now's your chance to show the studio what you're capable of and like how much you're willing to work on becoming what you want to become. Say you're an animator or like a sound designer, even if that's not your title yet, that's how you should feel, that's who you are. If you're working retail, you're working food industry, you aren't your job title. You're an artist, you're a sound designer, you're an animator. That's how you should live your life, so that when you go into that studio, you know exactly where you want to be, you know exactly how you have to get there, and you have to show everybody why they should be using you for your talents. So yeah, I think like you need to really open up and allow people to see your potential.
Thank you so much for watching, and especially a heartfelt thanks to Eric Tran for taking the time to let me interview him. And a big thanks to Combat Network. They provided all of the footage for the Mortal Kombat games pre-2011. They broadcast several tournaments and have a stunningly large archive of previous footage where you can watch some of the best Mortal Kombat and Injustice players in the country duke it out. Take a look at their YouTube or Twitch channel through the link below.